There's a moment in every gardener's life when you're standing in your backyard looking at your struggling tomato plants, and something fundamental shifts in your brain. You've just spent another $150 at the garden center on fertilizers and pest treatments and specialized soil amendments, and you suddenly remember that your grandmother grew tomatoes so perfect and abundant that she gave them away to half the neighborhood using nothing but coffee grounds and newspaper. It's not nostalgia talking. It's basic plant biology that works whether the gardening industry profits from it or not. And there are 15 specific techniques from the 1950s that will outperform practically every modern product you can buy, saving you hundreds of dollars while producing superior results. I've become slightly obsessed with comparing Victory Garden manuals from 70 years ago against modern gardening advice, trying to figure out exactly when we traded effectiveness for expensive dependency. If you're tired of throwing money at gardening problems that somehow keep getting worse instead of better, and you actually want to understand the methods that created real food security for an entire generation, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, because what I'm about to show you will fundamentally change how you think about growing food. When you think about successful gardening, what comes to mind? Maybe you picture someone with a perfectly organized tool shed, a garage full of specialized products, and a monthly budget dedicated to fertilizers, amendments, pest controls, and whatever new solution the garden center is promoting this season. But here's what might surprise you: the people who actually grow abundant, healthy gardens that produce year after year aren't necessarily the ones spending the most money or buying the latest products with the most impressive marketing claims. They're the ones who understand something that sounds almost too simple to be true. Modern gardening products are designed to create dependency, not success. Think about the business model for just a moment. If a $30 bottle of fertilizer actually built your soil biology to the point where you didn't need to keep buying it, how exactly would that company stay profitable? The entire system is optimized for repeat purchases, not for your long-term garden health. Now contrast that with how people gardened in the 1950s. Those Victory Garden manuals that every household kept weren't selling you products. They were teaching you systems. The fundamental goal wasn't to make you dependent on a supply chain of inputs. It was to create genuine food security and self-sufficiency at the household level. That difference in underlying purpose explains why a gardener in 1955 with basic biological knowledge and kitchen scraps could consistently outproduce a modern gardener who just dropped $500 at the garden center. Here's the uncomfortable truth the gardening industry really doesn't want you to figure out. Most of the expensive products lining those shelves exist to solve problems that modern gardening practices created in the first place. Synthetic fertilizers provide a quick green up that makes plants look healthy for a few weeks, but they actively destroy the soil microbiome that would naturally feed your plants for years. So next season, your soil is actually worse than it was before, which means you need even more fertilizer. Pesticides kill beneficial insects along with the pests, creating ecological imbalances that require more and more intervention. Specialized potting mixes work for one season, but compact and break down into something nearly useless, so you're buying fresh soil every single spring. The 1950s approach was fundamentally different at every level. Those gardeners understood that healthy soil biology creates healthy plants, and healthy plants resist pests and diseases naturally without chemical intervention. They knew that biological systems respond to understanding and proper management, not to expense and product dependency. When you understand how nitrogen fixation actually works, you don't need to buy nitrogen. When you know how to build soil structure, you don't need to replace your planting medium every year. This isn't about being anti-modern or romanticizing some imaginary past where everything was perfect. This is about recognizing that somewhere between 1950 and now, we made a trade. We exchanged genuine effectiveness and knowledge for the promise of convenience. And then we discovered the hard way that the convenience was mostly an illusion carefully constructed by people who profit when you fail. Let me paint you a picture of what happened between 1950 and today, because understanding this shift explains almost everything about why modern gardening is so expensive and frustrating. After World War II ended, chemical companies that had been manufacturing explosives and munitions for the war effort suddenly faced a significant business problem. They had these massive industrial facilities designed to produce nitrogen based compounds for bombs, and suddenly there was no war to sell them to. So they did what any large corporation would do when facing obsolescence. They found a new market. It turns out those exact same nitrogen compounds that had been used to create explosives could also be applied to soil as fertilizers, and thus began one of the most successful and consequential marketing campaigns in agricultural history. The chemical industry embarked on a decades long effort to convince an entire generation that traditional gardening methods were hopelessly old fashioned, inefficient, and frankly a bit embarrassing for modern people to rely on. The messaging was brilliant in its simplicity and relentless in its execution. Modern meant better, scientific meant superior, chemical meant advanced, traditional meant backward and superstitious. And slowly, gradually, over the course of just one generation, the practical knowledge that had been carefully passed down from grandmother to grandchild for centuries began to die out. Why would you bother learning to build soil health through composting when you could just buy a bag of miracle product that promised instant results? Why save seeds when you could purchase perfect hybrid varieties every spring? Why collect rainwater when municipal water was cheap and convenient? Here's what nobody mentioned during this massive cultural transition, and what the marketing campaigns certainly never explained. Yes, chemical fertilizers do provide a rapid boost of nutrients that make plants green up impressively fast. That part was absolutely true, but what they somehow forgot to mention is that these synthetic inputs actively destroy the soil biology that healthy plants naturally depend on for long term nutrition and disease resistance. They kill the beneficial fungi, the helpful bacteria, the entire ecosystem of microorganisms that would naturally provide nutrients to your plants year after year without any purchased inputs whatsoever. Which means once you start using synthetic fertilizers, you create a dependency cycle. Your soil biology degrades. Your plants can no longer access nutrients naturally. You have to keep buying more products just to maintain what you used to get for free from healthy soil. It's the perfect business model if you're selling fertilizer. It's a disaster if you're trying to build a productive garden. This is exactly how you end up with modern gardeners, spending hundreds or even thousands of dollars every season while achieving results that would have genuinely embarrassed a victory garden from 1950. We've created a system where success isn't the goal. Continued purchasing is the goal, and it works beautifully for the companies. For gardeners, not so much. But here's the thing that separates people who build genuinely abundant, productive gardens from those who struggle year after year while spending more and more money. Biological systems don't care about marketing campaigns. They don't respond to branding or clever packaging or impressive claims printed on bottles. They respond to actual conditions. Healthy soil with active microbiology, proper moisture management, and balanced available nutrients will outperform any product you can purchase, every single time, without exception. This isn't opinion. This isn't nostalgia. This is how plants have evolved to thrive for millions of years, long before anyone invented synthetic fertilizers or pesticides or any of the products we're now told are absolutely essential. The knowledge wasn't improved upon and replaced with something better. It was deliberately buried for profit. And now we're going to dig it back up and put it to work. Here's where things get really interesting, and where you start to see exactly how these 1950s methods stack up against their modern equivalents in terms of both cost and actual results. Let me show you the foundation techniques first, because once you understand these, everything else makes a lot more sense. Hack number one is newspaper mulch. You take old newspapers, lay them down around your plants in layers about 8 to 10 sheets thick, wet them thoroughly so they stay in place, and then cover them with a thin layer of grass clippings or shredded leaves for appearance. Total cost? Completely free. You were going to recycle those newspapers anyway. What does this replace? Landscape fabric, which runs anywhere from $50 to $100, depending on how much garden space you're covering. But here's what makes this approach genuinely superior rather than just cheaper. Landscape fabric suppresses weeds reasonably well for maybe one season, possibly two if you're lucky. And then you face the unpleasant task of trying to remove it when it starts breaking down into plastic fragments that contaminate your soil. Newspaper mulch suppresses weeds just as effectively, but as it decomposes over the growing season, it adds carbon to your soil, improving structure and water retention with every passing week. You're not just solving an immediate problem, you're actively building an asset that increases in value over time. Hack number two is coffee grounds mixed with crushed eggshells. Save your morning coffee grounds in a container. Save your eggshells from breakfast. Let the shells dry out for a day. Crush them into small pieces and mix them together with the grounds. Spread this mixture around the base of your plants every few weeks throughout the season. Cost, absolutely free. These are materials you are literally throwing in the trash. Modern equivalent, a bag of synthetic fertilizer that costs about $30 and provides a quick burst of nutrients that's essentially gone within a matter of days. The coffee grounds provide slow-release nitrogen that feeds your plants steadily for weeks, while simultaneously supporting the beneficial soil microorganisms that make nutrients available naturally. The crushed eggshells provide calcium, which prevents blossom and rot in tomatoes and peppers, a problem that frustrates gardeners constantly. This isn't complicated science. It's basic plant biology that works whether you fully understand the mechanisms or not. Hack number three is companion planting, specifically marigolds planted around tomatoes. A packet of marigold seeds costs maybe $2, often less if you catch a sale. You plant them in a circle around your tomato plants, and they release natural compounds through their roots that deter nematodes and other soil-dwelling pests that would otherwise damage your crop. What does this replace? Chemical pesticides that run $25 or more per bottle, leave residues on your food that you're going to eat, kill beneficial insects right along with the pests, and require repeated applications throughout the entire growing season because they break down quickly. The marigolds work continuously all season long without any additional input from you. They attract pollinators that help set fruit, and you can save their seeds at the end of the season for next year. After that initial $2 investment, you're completely done. You've created a permanent solution. Hack number four is making fish's emulsion fertilizer from kitchen scraps. Take your fish scraps when you clean fish, add vegetable peelings and other kitchen waste, put everything in a bucket with water, and let it ferment for a few weeks until it becomes this incredibly nutrient-rich liquid. Fair warning, it smells absolutely terrible, but plants thrive on it in ways that are genuinely remarkable to watch. Cost, free. Modern equivalent, bottled liquid fertilizer at $20 or more per container, and you'll need multiple bottles throughout a season. The homemade version is actually superior in performance because it contains a much wider range of nutrients and beneficial compounds, and it supports soil biology rather than destroying it the way synthetic fertilizers do. Let me repeat this because it's important. Every single one of these methods costs either nothing or just a few dollars one time, and every single one demonstrably outperforms products that cost 10 to 50 times more. But here's what's fascinating about these 1950s approaches, and it's something that modern gardening advice completely misses. Those first four hacks handle the basic inputs, but they're really just laying groundwork. The techniques that truly separate successful gardeners from people who struggle season after season go much deeper than simple materials. They're about understanding how plants actually function and working with natural biological cycles instead of constantly fighting against them. Hack number five is compost tea. You take finished compost, put a few scoops in a bucket of water, let it steep for 3 to 5 days while occasionally stirring, and then you have what old-timers genuinely called liquid gold for the garden. This isn't just another fertilizer, it's a concentrated dose of billions of beneficial microorganisms that colonize your soil and create the living ecosystem that healthy plants absolutely require. Cost, completely free if you're already composting, which you should be. Modern equivalent, bottled microbial inoculants that run $40 or more and might contain a tiny fraction of the microbial diversity you get from properly made compost tea. The critical difference is that you're not just feeding your plants some nutrients, you're building an entire soil food web that becomes more productive and resilient with every passing season. Hack number 6 is succession planting. Instead of planting all your lettuce or all your beans at one time, you plant a small amount every 2 weeks throughout the growing season. Same seed packet, same initial investment of maybe $3, but you get continuous harvests for 3 to 4 months instead of one big, overwhelming flush that you couldn't possibly eat before it bolts or gets tough. What does this replace in modern gardening? Buying transplants at the garden center every single week at $5 to $10 per six pack just to maintain continuous production. Over a full season, you're looking at $50 to $100 or more in transplant costs versus a single $3 packet of seeds that handles the entire season. The mathematics is almost insulting when you actually see it laid out like this. Hack number 7 is properly hardening off your transplants. When you start seeds indoors or purchase transplants, you gradually expose them to outdoor conditions over a period of 7 to 10 days before planting them permanently in the garden. An hour of outdoor time on day 1, 2 hours on day 2, steadily building up their tolerance to wind, temperature fluctuations, and direct sunlight. Cost: nothing except a bit of attention and time. What does this replace? Buying expensive transplants marketed as guaranteed to thrive at $8 or more per individual plant, which then proceed to die anyway when you stick them straight into the garden without proper acclimatization. Proper hardening off gives you a survival rate of 90% or better. That one simple practice saves most gardeners $50 to $100 per season just in replacement plants they don't have to buy. Hack number 8 is hand pollination using a small paintbrush. On plants like tomatoes, peppers, squash, and cucumbers, you can dramatically increase your fruit set by gently transferring pollen from flower to flower with a soft paintbrush. Takes maybe 5 minutes every few days. Cost: you probably already own a paintbrush. Modern alternative? Sprays marketed as pollinator attractants that run $15 and accomplish essentially nothing. Hand pollination gives you guaranteed fruit set, regardless of weather conditions, especially valuable in greenhouses or during periods when natural pollinators are inactive. Here's the pattern you're starting to see emerge. Modern gardening tells you to buy products to solve every problem. The 1950s approach teaches you to understand how plants actually work biologically. One path leads to permanent dependency on purchases. The other path leads to genuine mastery and independence. This is where most modern gardeners make their biggest mistake, and it's a mistake that costs them hundreds of dollars and countless hours of frustration. They think about gardening in terms of individual plants and individual products to fix individual problems, but the 1950s gardener thought in terms of complete systems. And these next techniques don't just save you money, though they absolutely do that. They fundamentally change what's actually possible in your garden space and how much it costs to achieve results that most modern gardeners think are out of reach. Hack number 9 is deep watering once weekly instead of shallow watering daily. Most modern gardeners turn on the sprinkler or drip system for 10 or 15 minutes every single evening, which trains plant roots to stay near the soil surface where they're vulnerable to heat stress, drought, and damage. The 1950s approach is to water deeply once or maybe twice a week, soaking the soil to a depth of 6 to 8 inches. This forces roots to grow deep into the soil profile, creating genuinely drought-resistant plants that can handle environmental stress without collapsing. The practical result: your water bill drops by $30 to $50 per month during summer months, sometimes more depending on your local water rates. At the same time, your plants actually become healthier, more productive, and more resilient to problems. Modern gardening advice tells you to water more frequently and to buy moisture control products and soil amendments. The actual biology tells you the exact opposite approach works dramatically better. Hack number 10 is season extension using cold frames built from salvaged windows. Old windows are frequently free from construction sites, renovation projects, or people replacing their windows. You build a simple wooden frame from scrap lumber, attach the windows on top at an appropriate angle to catch sunlight, and you've just added 4 to 8 weeks of growing time on both ends of your season. Total cost if you salvage the windows: maybe $20 in screws and dimensional lumber for the frame. Modern equivalent, season extender kits and commercial row, cover systems that run $200 or more, and honestly, don't work nearly as well as a properly built cold frame. But here's what's genuinely significant about this technique beyond just the cost savings. Those extra weeks on each end of the season mean you can grow two complete crops where you used to grow just one. Spring greens, followed by summer tomatoes, followed by fall greens again, all in the same space. You're not just saving money on products, you're literally doubling your harvest productivity from the exact same garden footprint. Hack number 11 is crop rotation on a 3-year cycle. You mentally divide your garden into 3 sections and rotate plant families through them systematically each year. Tomatoes and peppers in section 1 this year get moved to section 2 next year, then section 3 the following year, then back to section 1. This prevents disease buildup in the soil, manages nutrients naturally as different plants have different needs and contributions, and eliminates the need for most synthetic soil amendments. Cost. Just planning and keeping basic records. What does this replace? Synthetic soil amendments and disease treatment products that easily run $50 or more per year, often much more if you're dealing with recurring problems. But the real benefit isn't just the money you save, it's that your soil actually improves year over year instead of degrading, which means your garden becomes steadily more productive and requires less intervention the longer you maintain these systems. Think about what these 3 techniques represent at a deeper level. They're not about buying your way out of problems. They're about understanding how water moves through soil, how seasons and temperature work, and how soil fertility actually functions. Once you understand the underlying biology, you can design systems that work with natural processes instead of constantly fighting against them. And those systems don't just maintain themselves adequately, they actually improve and strengthen over time. Here's why these final 4 techniques are so genuinely significant. They don't just save you money or improve your harvest numbers, though they certainly do both of those things. They fundamentally transform your entire relationship with gardening, from being a consumer who depends on industrial supply chains to being a producer with real food security and genuine self sufficiency. And that shift changes absolutely everything about how you think about food, independence, and what's actually possible. Hack number 12 is seed saving. At the end of your growing season, you intentionally let some of your best performing plants go to seed. You collect those seeds, dry them properly using simple techniques, and store them for next year's planting. Cost, nothing. Time investment, maybe an hour total for your entire garden. What does this replace? Buying seeds every single year at $50 to $100 or more, depending on what you grow and how much garden space you're working with. But here's what makes this practice genuinely transformative rather than just money saving. When you save seeds from plants that thrived in your specific garden conditions, you're building genetics that are progressively adapted to your exact microclimate, your particular soil, your water patterns, your local pest pressures. After 3 or 4 generations of saving seeds from your best performers, you have varieties that are essentially custom designed for your precise location in ways that no commercial seed company could ever match, no matter how much you spent. You're not just saving money, you're creating something that has genuine, irreplaceable value. Hack number 13 is rainwater collection using simple barrels. You can get food grade 55-gallon barrels for about $30 each, sometimes completely free from restaurants or construction sites that are just trying to get rid of them. You attach them to your downspouts with basic hardware, and every decent rain event fills them with free irrigation water. A typical barrel holds 55 gallons. If you set up 3 or 4 barrels, that's 200 plus gallons of water you didn't pay municipal rates for. Over a growing season in most climates, that translates to hundreds of dollars in water bill savings. But there's another significant benefit most people don't initially consider. Rainwater doesn't contain the chlorine, fluoride, and other chemicals found in treated municipal water. Plants actually grow measurably better with rainwater. You're getting superior results while spending nothing. Hack number 14 is interplanting using the Three Sisters method that indigenous farmers in North America developed and refined over centuries. You plant corn, beans, and squash together in the same growing space. The corn provides a natural structure for the beans to climb. The beans fix atmospheric nitrogen in the soil through their root nodules, which feeds both the corn and the squash. The large squash leaves shade the ground, preventing weed growth and retaining soil moisture. Three different crops thriving in the space where modern monoculture gardening would grow just one with zero fertilizer needed because the system feeds itself through biological processes. What does this replace? Monoculture planting that requires synthetic fertilizers costing $30 or more per season just to maintain adequate nutrition. The biological efficiency of this traditional approach is genuinely remarkable when you see it functioning properly. Hack number 15 is lasagna composting, sometimes called sheet composting. Instead of building a separate traditional compost pile, you layer brown materials like cardboard and dry leaves with green materials like grass clippings and kitchen scraps directly on your garden beds in fall. Cardboard, leaves, grass clippings, kitchen scraps, more leaves, more cardboard, building up layers. By spring planting time, it has all decomposed into rich, perfect soil. Cost. Free, you're using yard waste and materials you'd otherwise throw away or spend money bagging up for disposal. Modern equivalent? Buying bagged compost at $8 to $12 per bag, and you'd need dozens of bags for the same coverage area. But the real advantage is that you're building unlimited soil amendment capacity. You're never limited by what you can afford to purchase. You're only limited by the organic matter you can source, which in most suburban and rural situations is essentially unlimited. Now, some of you are probably thinking this all sounds like way too much work. You might be wondering whether it's genuinely worth the effort and learning curve when you can just drive to the garden center and pick up whatever products claim to solve your specific problems. And I completely understand that reaction. Modern life is genuinely busy, and the promise of convenient, ready-made solutions is undeniably appealing. But let me break down the actual time and effort equation here, because I think you'll find the real comparison is very different from what you're assuming. The modern product-dependent approach requires constant ongoing intervention. You're making trips to the garden center every few weeks to buy more fertilizer, more pest spray, more soil amendments, more of whatever the current problem seems to require. You're applying those products on rigid schedules. You're constantly troubleshooting problems that keep recurring because you're treating symptoms rather than building genuinely healthy systems. Add it all up, honestly, and you're looking at multiple hours every single week managing problems, plus hundreds of dollars in product costs that never actually end. The 1950s systems approach requires more thinking and learning up front, absolutely. But it requires far less ongoing maintenance once you understand what you're doing. You spend time in the off season learning how your particular soil works and planning your crop rotations. You set up systems like rainwater collection and cold frames one time. Then those systems essentially run themselves with minimal input from you. Your garden becomes more resilient and self-regulating year after year, requiring steadily less intervention rather than more. Here's the question you really need to ask yourself honestly. What's actually convenient in any meaningful sense? Buying expensive products that create dependency and require constant repurchasing while delivering mediocre results. Or understanding basic plant biology well enough that your garden largely takes care of itself while producing abundance. As for not having a green thumb, that's honestly just marketing language carefully designed to make you feel like gardening. Success is some mysterious innate talent you either possess or you don't. These are biological systems, not magic spells. Nitrogen fixation works exactly the same way, whether you fully understand the biochemistry or not. Deep watering creates deep root systems regardless of your supposed natural abilities. If you can follow basic instructions and observe what actually happens in your garden, you can make these techniques work. The real convenience, the kind that actually matters, is this. Once you build genuinely healthy soil through composting and rotation, Once you establish your seed saving routine and your water collection, once you understand companion planting and succession planting, you're basically done with the expensive parts of gardening forever. You're no longer dependent on product marketing or constantly wondering why things aren't working despite following all the instructions printed on bottles. Start with just 3 to 5 hacks that directly address your biggest current frustrations. If your summer water bill is painful, start with deep watering technique and rainwater collection. If you're throwing money at pest problems every season, focus on companion planting and building soil health through compost. If transplants keep dying on you, master proper hardening off and succession planting from seed. You don't need all 15 techniques implemented immediately. You need to stop the financial bleeding where it hurts most, then build from there. So there you have it, 15 gardening hacks from the 1950s that will outperform practically anything you can buy at a modern garden center. Newspaper mulch and coffee grounds for building soil health, companion planting and compost tea for managing pests and nutrition naturally, deep watering and succession planting for system efficiency, cold frames and crop rotation for season extension and maintaining soil fertility, seed saving, rainwater collection, interplanting, and lasagna composting for achieving complete independence from the garden industry supply chain. Let me break down what this actually means in concrete, practical terms. The modern product dependent approach to gardening costs the average home gardener somewhere between $500 and $1,000 per year in products, amendments, transplants, treatments, and various inputs. That's real money that adds up year after year with no end point. The 1950 systems approach requires maybe $50 to $100 in initial setup costs for things like barrels and lumber, for cold frames, and then near zero ongoing expenses after that first season. But the difference isn't just financial, though the money certainly matters. The modern approach consistently delivers mediocre results that require constant intervention, constant troubleshooting, constant problem solving that never quite solves anything permanently. The 1950s approach builds biological systems that become steadily more productive and more resilient year after year after year. This knowledge very nearly died with just one generation. The shift from gardening as an essential skill to gardening as recreational consumption happened so gradually, so smoothly, that most people didn't even notice the transition was occurring. Your grandmother almost certainly knew how to save seeds, how to collect and use rainwater, how to build soil health through proper composting. That accumulated knowledge wasn't passed down to the next generation because the dominant culture decided it was old-fashioned, inefficient, vaguely embarrassing for modern educated people to rely on. Except it turns out that knowledge wasn't old-fashioned at all. It was the biological foundation of genuine food security and household self-sufficiency, and we traded it away for marketing promises. Here's your choice, and it's a choice you're making, whether you consciously decide or just let things continue as they are. You can spend next growing season exactly the same way you spent last season, buying products that underperform their promises, wondering why your garden doesn't produce the abundance you hoped for, despite following all the expert advice, spending more money year after year on the same recurring problems. Or you can start learning and implementing methods that actually work with plant biology instead of fighting against it. Methods that become more effective over time instead of requiring constant reinvestment. Methods that build genuine independence instead of profitable dependency. The biology doesn't lie, even when the marketing does. Deep roots develop when you water deeply instead of frequently. Nitrogen fixation happens automatically when you plant beans in your crop rotation. Soil microbiomes thrive when you add diverse organic matter through composting. These aren't opinions or trends or the latest fashionable gardening approach. They're biological realities that have been creating abundant gardens for thousands of years, long before anyone invented synthetic fertilizers or pesticides. 1 year from now, you'll either be harvesting more food than your family can eat while spending almost nothing on inputs, or you'll still be making those weekly trips to the garden center, wondering why the promises on the bottles never quite match the results in your garden.